Another of the tort reform measures that is on the agenda for this year is, I believe that in this time it's going to take the form of a House bill, and that's prevailing wage.
Prevailing wage, I guess I think more of labor reform than tort reform even, but it is definitely a reform that many of us have longed for a long time, especially those of us in rural communities. Most of us rural legislators realize just how significantly some of our public jurisdictions are hurt, schools, libraries, even universities, by Missouri's current prevailing wage law that effectively moves the wages from urban areas like Kansas City or St. Louis into our rural communities and dramatically increases the cost of building a new school building or adding facilities at a school building or building roads, any kind of use of public funds for construction purposes. We've just not been able to get that reformed. There have been efforts in the past to try to get more input so that the prevailing wages, which are supposed to be by county, so that we had more input from local reference points, and that's just never happened. So what ends up happening is that the only information that prevailing wage ends up based on is city wage scales, and cost of living, of course, is lower in the rural areas, but also the income base for tax bases for most of those counties is significantly lower, and it's really been a punishment for a lot of our public schools and other public facilities, including roads that might be constructed. So we're hoping that we will get to prevailing wage before long and be able to work on the House bill or even the Senate bill, but it's a little late now, I think, to be trying to send another bill over to the House and be able to get some of those reforms done so that construction projects, we might be able to build 3 times as many miles of roads in our rural districts or build our schools for a third of the bonding that is currently happening in areas that need new schools. So I'm hoping that that happens. You hear pushback a lot from folks who believe that their livelihood is based on prevailing wage. I don't think that's the case. We're trying to look at other states and look at the history that Missouri has to see whether there's any substantiation of those fears or not. But I believe the taxpayers in Missouri really deserve to get more for their dollar, and so we're moving forward on prevailing wage.
This, again, is largely been urban versus rural in the form of, it seems, the higher end of the wages. I guess it works out well if you're getting $57 an hour for a job, but that's money that has to come from somewhere.
That's exactly right, and it's the taxpayer that pays that. And it obviously, if you're the wage earner, you're happy to receive higher wages. None of us would turn down higher wages. But when it's public dollars, then those are responsibilities that those of us who are elected to office take very seriously. And we understand that the model changes without those artificial wage bases, but I believe that it's in the best interest of Missourians long term, all Missourians, if we eliminate the prevailing wage laws that we have now.
Missouri Senate giving its approval to a bill that would start a prescription drug monitoring program. I believe that is now in the House.
That's correct. That was a bill that I opposed and voted against, but it did pass. It was a lesser evil than some of the other proposals that have been made and some that are still out there waiting for, I guess, debate and hopefully not approval, but they're hoping for approval. You know, the more I look at PDMP and the more I examine what's happened in other states, the more convinced I am that we're giving up liberties and privacy and getting nothing in return, because we're not seeing any statistical evidence anywhere that these programs are working. It's not like we're experimenting. It's not like we're pioneering here. There are 49 other states that have PDMPs in place in those states, and statistically, not a single one of them has seen an improvement in terms of the drug-related deaths. In fact, if my recollection is correct, when I looked at the 49 states, there were more states that actually saw an increase in deaths than there were that saw a decrease. My personal opinion is that may be a reflection of what happens when you do eliminate the opioids, or at least restrict them, and that is that people move to heroin, and heroin is an even more deadly drug, but it is kind of the low-cost alternative to prescription drugs. When I talked to our new Director of Health and Senior Services, his comment to me, he's coming from North Carolina. They do have a PDMP in North Carolina. He told me that 23% of the doctors that use the PDMP. So you're starting out with only less than a quarter of the doctors that are actually using it. I heard the same day from another doctor who who told me that he had read something that said somewhere between 5 and 20% of the opioids that are abused come from prescriptions, from abusing prescriptions, that the rest of them come from robbing somebody's medicine chest, either your grandma's or your neighbor's or someone else's. And so when you look at maybe a maximum of 20% of the drugs actually come from doctor shopping, and only 23% of the doctors who could be shopped are using the program, then you're looking at around a maximum of 5% of the population that's being impacted. That may be part of the explanation for why we're not seeing any statistical change, is these programs just simply are not working, but they do in fact expose my constituents to invasion of their privacy and to compromises in their liberty.